Welcome to Hashtag VOA. Andrew, what's trending today?
Well, I know Cal wants to wish somebody a happy birthday today.
Yes, it's like our boss's boss happy birthday, Mr. President.
44.
Yeah. And we're also talking about the Republican debate, the first debate of the 2016 campaign season. That's coming up on Thursday, but today...
We're all about Cecil the Lion. Everybody knows the story, so all you got to do is...
Roll it, Steve.
Welcome inside the studio. I'm Cal Perry. Now, it's a story that you are familiar with, a story that has swept the internet, caused protests, and now a petition to deport the American who took the life of a famous lion in Zimbabwe. Now, big game hunting is nothing new. It's been going on for decades. But this lion, according to many, was different, unique. He was supposed to be protected. And so now the issue of big game hunting is back front and center. Cecil the lion, a national treasure in Zimbabwe, he was living on a protected reserve. The wrong lion shot and killed in the wrong spot by an American dentist, Walter Palmer, from the U.S. state of Minnesota. He allegedly lured Cecil outside protected land where hunting is illegal, his guides using the carcass of a dead animal and a pickup truck to lure the lion towards the hunter. Originally shot with an arrow, the group reportedly had to track the animal an additional 40 hours before killing it. Outrage followed, not only in Africa, but here in the United States as well. Hashtag Cecil the Lion started trending. The dentist shuttered up his practice and went into hiding. We've seen this before with Palmer, even if we didn't know it until now. A deep dive into social media uncovers images where he poses boldly with his trophies. The timing and perhaps the attention comes on the heels of President Obama's first trip as U.S. President to Kenya. Now there's a petition the White House must legally respond to. More than 150,000 Americans petitioning for Palmer to be extradited back to Zimbabwe. It's not that simple when you consider international law.
And obviously humanitarian concerns and the ability of an individual to receive a fair trial may be considered at this stage of the process.
There are so many different threads of this story to discuss. We're going to be spending the full show on it, of course. I want to introduce first, though, very quickly, Beth Allgood. She's joining us from the International Fund for Animal Welfare. She's going to hang on through this first segment and be a part of our panel in segment 2 and 3. But first, this is a story that has exploded on social media, and as always, our Andrew Palczewski has kept an eye on that. Andrew.
Absolutely, Cal. As the first pictures of Dr. Walter Palmer and Cecil the Lion emerged, anger swept across social media. Anger not just about the death of Cecil, but about the hunting of rare animals. So we have tweets like this one from actress Mia Farrow, who call out game hunters, saying animals are not trophies, ever. On the other side, Sabrina Corgatelli, the Idaho huntress, as she's been come to known, for her big game trophies. She says, quote, just because we hunt animals doesn't mean we don't have a respect for them. She also says legal hunting helps conservation efforts. But from this debate, we've begun to see action. Delta Airlines, along with American United, and we've just heard as well Virgin and British Airways, have announced they're banning the transport of all big game hunting trophies on their flights. Meanwhile, U.S. Senator Robert Menendez tweeted, let's not be cowardly lions when it comes to trophy killings, in announcing the Cecil Act, which would further restrict the importation of animal trophies. Of course, lots of reaction is also coming in from you, our viewers. We'll be sharing some of your comments later on in the show. But for now, back to you, Cal.
Professor David McDonald has been at the center of this story. He is the director of wildcru.org. He is joining us from London. Thank you very much, Professor, for your time. I think my first question to you is what do we talk about now? Is the story still about Cecil? What should we be talking about today on today's show?
Well, I think actually we should talk only briefly about Cecil, tragic and important though his illegal death was. Let's talk briefly about the science that underpins conservation and how people are to live with wildlife. But then I think if we have time, let's move on, because the picture is actually about a much bigger, I think, unique moment in history in terms of people's attitude worldwide to conservation and nature, and a remarkable educational opportunity. But if I may, First, on Cecil, this lion was one of 200 or so that Andy Loveridge and myself, my colleague, have tracked. And we base our entire work on gathering the scientific facts, both natural science and social science, about the lives of the lions and the lives of the people that must live alongside them to try and solve problems of conservation, to improve policy and lead to better conservation. That's what the whole thing is about. But now I think we can move on from the detail of Cecil and talk about the big picture.
So let's talk about that big picture, and I would urge our viewers to go to wildcru.org to read some of the articles you've been writing in recent days. I know that you've seen an influx in funding, and I suppose that's good and it's bad based on the circumstances, but how do we talk about conservation and coexistence?
Well, it seems to me that what we've seen here is unique. I use that word carefully. It's about a community of millions and millions of people around the world, catalyzed by Cecil, to express an enthusiasm and a value for nature. Nature that we humans depend on, and we have to find ways of living alongside nature in the 21st century. So I take this out of a moment of sadness as a colossal moment of hope, where this international community is saying, we value nature, and how are we going to live alongside it? That seems to me to be the big question. And if I could throw in a second big question that has just emerged in the last couple of days, it is that I think there's a fantastic educational opportunity here, because young people are going to be the future. And just yesterday, I don't know if your viewers have seen it, but the manufacturers of a thing called a beanie, it's a children's toy, have said they're going to start producing a Cecil toy with a link to us at the Wild Crew. And I think, goodness me, does that mean that we can get the Wild Crew's work to hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of young people around the world to start turning the Cecil opportunity, if I can call it that, out of all that sadness, out of all the illegality, into something that can start to change the way people think and start to change the way, most importantly, people behave. Because humanity needs to change its behavior if the 21st century is to see us escape from what is currently a ghastly biodiversity crisis that is afflicting lions throughout Africa, but also nature as a whole.
What can people do? Before I let you go, if you're watching this from anywhere in the world and you feel disconnected from this cause or disconnected from this story, what can people do?
Well, if people are interested, you've mentioned they can go to wildcrew.org and read some of the notices we're putting up to try and keep them in touch. But I think what people can do is that they can realize modern conservation is not about a few guys with beards and binoculars like myself who happen to like animals. It's about something much bigger. It's about how the burgeoning human race can, in all its different interests and complexions, live alongside nature for the benefit and well-being of both. People can think about their own lives and how they impact nature, and they can make choices, ultimately political choices with a small p, in their own lives about how the future is going to unfold, because we are on the edge of an extinction crisis. In more detail, I suppose, we have been overwhelmed with gratitude at the generosity of the people around the world, many of them from America, who have made donations to our project. We live, by the way, hand to mouth, entirely on philanthropy. 3 weeks ago, Andy Loveridge and myself, my colleague on this project, were thinking we were going to have to close down large parts of it because we couldn't afford to pay the salaries. Those people around the world, I think 11,000 of them now, who've made donations, have turned that around for us. We can do better and more conservation. And I say that with opportunity comes responsibility, and we want to live up to the faith people are showing in us, and I want to express my gratitude right now.
Professor MacDonald, thank you very much for your time joining us from Oxford, England. Very grateful. As always, again, the website wildcrew, wildcru.org. Please do take a look. Our next guest is joining us from Dallas. He is Ben Carter, the executive director of the Dallas Safari Club, international organization of hunters, conservationists, and wildlife enthusiasts. He's joining us on the phone from Dallas. Thank you, Mr. Carter, for your time today.
Sure. Glad to be here.
You know, In the news business right now, it seems that people jump to the extremes. It seems that you are either pro-hunting and therefore you're pro-death, or you're anti-hunting and therefore you're pro-conservation. I'd imagine you would probably take issue with that.
Yeah, I absolutely would, because you can't separate the two. Hunters are conservationists. A lot of the components that are left out in the conversation, like the previous conversation, is you've got to deal with real world issues, which is economics. Africa is a very poor continent. There's not a lot of prosperity there. What they do have is wildlife, and I can tell you, having been there, that the wildlife will absolutely disappear if the hunting disappears, because there's got to be an economic incentive for people to not poach over there. Poaching is rampant, and none of these countries are wealthy. They don't have money to just spend on poaching. And the way the model has been and has always been is the hunting pays for the anti-poaching and the conservation. A lot of people don't distinguish the difference between poaching and legal hunting. They think anyone that hunts and kills an animal is doing it legally. That's not right. As hunters and as an organization, we only support legal, ethical hunting. And what that means is there's data on areas where a person will have a concession. In that concession, they will pay a lot of money for that concession. A lot of that money goes to the community, the indigenous community in that area, as a motivation for them to not poach. Many of that community are hired to work on the safari team. There may be up to 50 or 60 people that will be hired out of a community that will work there. So everything they're doing is coming to them through hunting, which also encourages them not to poach. And poaching, the difference between poaching and hunting is similar to going to the bank. You can get money out of a bank two ways. You can withdraw the money out of your account, or you can go in there with a gun and you can hold it up and take the money out. And that's the difference between poaching and hunting. Poaching is illegal. We abhor it. It is not something that we support, and we want people to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law when they have gone through due process and it's been found that they were guilty. I don't know what happened on this hunt, and I don't think anyone else does. I don't think that there's been enough information out there, but I think an awful lot of people have jumped on board and immediately condemned what happened. I've heard several reports that there's some facts that are left out of there, too, as well. In Zimbabwe, if a lion wanders out of the protected park, which they do, they come in and out, they're fair game. I don't know the circumstances of what happened. I'm not going to predict that, but all I can say is that hunting plays an incredibly important role in Africa. If it goes away, the dollars that keep the animals there is also going to go away.
Can you talk to me very briefly about how this works? How does this actually function in the real world? Do you work with governments in Africa to provide permits for people that come to you and say they want to go hunt in Africa? I'm just trying to figure out the mechanics.
No, there's no. Actually, and the other thing is people throw out around the term endangered species all the time, and a lot of times they're not actually talking about animals that are on the endangered species list. Not all lions are on the endangered species list, okay? There's a body called the IUCN as well as CITES. CITES is the organization that studies populations of wildlife in the world, and in areas where they feel like that a species is threatened for whatever reasons, whether it's habitat or encroachment or whatever, that's when they may list it to threatened. Okay, that also doesn't mean that they're necessarily endangered, and they may still be special permits that are issued that some of those may be taken in a hunt. But again, the money part has got to be put in the equation, because a lot of people say, oh, well, phototourism. The statistics show that phototourism pays a minuscule part of wildlife management. The fees that they pay for going into wild areas and photographing animals is tiny compared to what hunting concessions have to pay, and what that money can go back to the wildlife department to manage the wildlife.
Before I let you go, if it turns out that Dr. Palmer did lure by the use of guides this lion by using a dead carcass, would you condemn that? Would the Dallas Safari Club condemn that?
The Dallas Safari Club would condemn any actions in a hunt that was illegal or unethical. We support only ethical hunting.
All right, Mr. Carter, I'm very grateful for you taking the time to join us. I know it's exceptionally busy down there for you in Dallas, and I know that this is an important subject. We have to squeeze in a very quick break. When we get back, we're going to bring in our panel, Raoul Dutoit, who is in Zimbabwe, and Beth Allgood, who I introduced you to earlier. Stay with us. My name is Cal Perry. I've been at Voice of America now for 2 years. 2001, 9/11 happened, and that propelled me to find a job in media. They were looking for young people who were willing to go with the U.S. military into Baghdad and film that. It was the highest high to the lowest low. There was moments that you found yourself crying over something you had seen, and then moments of absolute elation of witnessing history. I met my wife in Libya. We both kind of realized that in order to have a family, you have to take a step back. I was interested in returning to D.C., where I grew up, and found a home in Voice of America, a place that's really changing. People are searching for a place where they can find accurate information. The internet's changed that. Social media's changed that. VOA does a very good job of providing historical context to our audience overseas, context that you may not find everywhere.
Like us on Facebook at #VOA.
I'm Linor Moudou from Africa 54. This is VOA. Follow us on Africa 54. Go to facebook.com/VOA Africa 54.
Welcome back in the studio. I'm Cal Perry. Now, we have a Skype guest on from Zimbabwe, Raoul Dutoit. He's a well-respected wildlife activist, in fact, a winner of the Goldman Prize. He's joining us via Skype. Thank you very much, sir. And waiting patiently here throughout our last interview, Beth Allgood. She's the campaign director for International Fund for Animal Welfare. Excuse me. And thank you for waiting patiently. I could sense that you wanted to jump in. What was your thoughts on the interview we just did out of Dallas?
Well, I had a couple thoughts on a couple different things. And the first one was about endangered species. And there are different types of listings of endangered species. So I would say that the IUCN Red List is generally a well-respected way of listing. And lions are considered vulnerable on the IUCN list. CITES is another way of listing, and that's a trade body in trade of endangered species, and they're generally more conservative around listing because there's a lot of different interests that regulate trade, and some of them are pro-trade, some are a little more restrictive. But right now, lions are listed on Appendix 2, which means that there is trade allowed in lions, and there's some movement to list them as Appendix 1, which would restrict trade. They're not listed on the U.S. endangered species list, but there is a proposed rule to list them as threatened that IFAW and some other organizations have put in a petition to do that.
Raoul, before I ask you questions about conservation, I wanted to ask you about how the story is playing in Zimbabwe. It's front page news here in the United States, and I'm wondering if people think that people are making too much of it, not enough of it. How are people in Zimbabwe sort of relating to this news story?
Well, there are varied views. A lot of people in this country are asking why there's such a fuss. We're hearing all this noise from the rest of the world. But the common people in this country are saying, why suddenly we're hearing people outside Zimbabwe telling us how we should manage our conservation and our land use? As a professional conservationist, I can see many reasons why there needs to be more attention paid to wildlife management in this country and to the enforcement of regulations. But for the average person in the street who's out of work and is not seeing tourists. Zimbabwe's got very low tourist visitation apart from Victoria Falls, and is certainly not going to get any cuddly lion toys out of this. They're asking what is this all about, and therefore the questions about how these things play out in terms of livelihoods become very important, and we have to see some reality there. We have to actually drill down and see what really counts economically in terms of maintaining people's livelihoods and allowing them to live next door to wildlife, because it's those people, not the people who are getting the cuddly lion toys, who have to be given a good reason to want to live next to lions.
You're there. You're a Goldman Prize winner. You know better than anyone whether or not these big game hunts, these trophy hunts, is the money making it where it needs to make it? I mean, the argument that I'm given by people is, listen, you know, this is economic incentive to these small villages. Does that argument bear weight with you?
To a certain extent, but not fully, in the sense that it needs to be done a lot better. It's easy to chuck out the arguments about how we benefit in communities, but a lot has happened in Zimbabwe in terms of a loss of professionalism in the wildlife industry, in terms of a veering away from some of the ethics, and a lot needs to be tightened up. And the hunting industry outside this country needs, on the one hand, to recognize that, yes, wildlife is an important part of rural land use, and hunting is a very important part of wildlife-based land use, but it needs to be tidied up considerably. And the hunting organizations need to actually start getting a lot more stuck into enforcing ethics, to peer pressure, to due diligence in terms of the kind of hunters who come out here. And we see a lot of complacency, a lot of big words, but fundamentally we're dealing with problems of corruption on the ground here, we're dealing with problems of land use pressure, we're dealing with ugly realities. And while we've seen the outsurge of international concern, and yes, I take what Professor McDonald said earlier, it is heartening to see people stepping up and voicing that concern. It needs to be translated into something that is actually happening on the ground here in terms of doing something right next to these wildlife areas to reduce the problems of human-wildlife conflict and give these animals some value, whether it's tourism or hunting. More needs to happen.
Beth, help me frame the problem. You know, a lot of what I'm hearing now is what we're hearing on Twitter, and we'll get more of that from Andrew, that this is an American-caused problem. Is there any truth behind that?
Yes. Well,
no, it's.
Well, I would say that 60% of the lion trophy hunting is done by Americans. And so that's about 400 trophies a year. And that there are about 600 lion trophy hunts a year across Africa, and about 400 of those are Americans. That's the studies we've seen. And the other lion population issues are that across Africa, lion populations have declined about 60% over the past 30 years, and there are about 32,000 lions across Africa.
This conversation that we're having and that Raul has been talking about, the Americanization of the news story, has sparked really a lot of what we're seeing on social media. And Andrew, I know that you've been tracking that, but it's really been sort of the thing driving the debate.
Yeah, absolutely. The circumstances of Cecil the lion's death has sparked a wide range of emotions on social media. We asked you, our viewers, for your reaction and received an overwhelming response, not just about Cecil and Dr. Palmer, but about the issues broader than this one case. Joanna from the UK sums up her feeling about Cecil's death and big game hunting in this simple tweet. "Bloody disgusting is my reaction," she says. "It has to stop." Similarly, Yaya from Afghanistan says he, Dr. Palmer, had no right to do this, but he did it. He trampled the rules. He is a convict. He has to pay for what he did. Let the Zimbabwe government take action. From Kenya, Nadara writes, "The lion has already died, and there is nothing we can do to make it alive. The only thing we can do is to ensure that animals are protected for tourism and discourage hunting by enacting strict measures. The man should also not be let to go free before the law and before he faces the law." And Tina Shea from Zimbabwe reminds us, as much as the death of Cecil the lion was tragic, she writes, we are Zimbabweans. We have greater problems that also need looking at. As always, we want to hear from you, our viewers, on this issue and any other topics you'd like us to focus on. Join us on our social media. Join the conversation at Twitter, at #VOA, and at facebook.com/#VOA. We look forward to hearing from you and chatting with you. Cal?
Raul, let me toss it back to you. Is there such a thing as ethical hunting, and does it have a role in conservation?
Let me give you an example. I actually work on rhino conservation. That's my game. And about 15 years ago, we had to find a place to put rhinos that were being exterminated through the resettlement that was happening in Zimbabwe. So we moved them into an area of suitable habitat, and what's maintaining that area is hunting. I will go along with what was said before by the gentleman from Dallas Safari Club, that hunting is the enabling mechanism to maintain the anti-poaching, etc., in that area. We now have the world's third largest black rhino population in that particular area, along with a very healthy lion population, which is also subject to research by the Oxford University crew. So, yes, hunting does play a role, and I'd be very worried to see the baby being thrown out with the bathwater. At the same time, there's absolutely no doubt there's huge corruption in that industry. There's a lot of unethical practices, and I've certainly learned enough or heard enough about that hunt of Cecil the lion to draw my own conclusion that it was highly unethical. This needs to be sorted out, because what we're seeing is the polarization of the debate is not helping anybody, and we're not getting to a stage where people are saying, okay, let's now focus on the economic realities, the conservation realities, put aside some of the emotion, look at what's needed in Africa, maintain wildlife areas, and get on with sorting this out. And as I said before, I think that the hunting fraternities have got a lot that they need to do on their side. They need to step in actively and clean up their act. If they don't, hunting will go steadily, it'll be steadily eroded by the international animal rights sort of movement, and I'm not trying to criticize it. It's like different religions. If airlines are not going to carry trophies and other issues start coming up, it's going to start suppressing hunting, and we're going to lose that land use option. But at the same time, hunting is a mess, and it's got to be cleaned up.
Would you agree, Beth? You and I were talking earlier about the airlines stepping up. They're now not going to take some of these trophies back. This is a good thing, I mean, on the one side, but as Raoul says, it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
Well, I mean, there's nothing automatic about trophy hunting money going to communities and there's nothing automatic about ecotourism money going to communities. It really depends on how these things are set up. And I would say that whether it's trophy hunting or poaching, ultimately the animal is dead. Our organization cares about individual animals as well as, species and habitats. So there's that to keep in mind. And I think, ultimately valuing an animal more dead than alive is a fundamental issue that underpins all of this. So ultimately we have that. But I think that in many places we have a problem of that the economic value of an animal alive has a long-term lifetime value for people that will come and see it. And
give me the stat on Americans who are willing to go look at the animals. What was it?
Well, we have done polling, and 70% of Americans said they would go on a photo safari, ecotourism type safari, and only 6.6% of Americans would go to hunt an animal. So there's that. It's a growing field, and the trophy hunting of Americans who would trophy hunt is a diminishing group of people. So I think that, and I have a stat about the value of an elephant over its lifetime, $1.6 million in Kenya for a 70-year-old elephant, an elephant that lives 70 years, versus a one-time trophy hunt. Once you hunt it or poach it or sell it for its ivory or whatever you're going to do, that's it for that elephant. So, I understand that there are situations where there are places that tourists don't go, but we have to try to find creative solutions that don't involve lethal use of the animals. That's our belief.
And maybe, as you say, one of those things are ecotourism and photography tours. We already killed a commercial break in this show and still didn't have enough time. We were going to talk about corruption in Africa, and that's going to have to wait for another show. I want to thank all my guests. Raoul du Toit, he is a wildlife activist, a Goldman Prize winner, kind enough to join us live from Zimbabwe today. It was a great show. Thank you, Beth, very much. Beth Elgood as well. Andrew, thank you. And to our entire team here at VOA News, you can always catch up on the latest, of course, at voanews.com. You can get us on our Facebook page, as well as Twitter, of course. You can reach me at Perry Cal. And we'll see you next week. On behalf of the entire team here at Voice of America, thank you for watching.
Outdoors Maryland